In Laboratory Reddit, today's story is...
I exposed my sister's toxic messages when she pretended to be the best aunt. Her rich fiancé discovered everything. My relationship with my older sister Jane was never the best, but it all got noticeably worse when I announced I was expecting a baby last year. To give you a better understanding of the situation, I should mention that I am 27 years old and have shared my life with Mark, my husband of 29 years, for 8 years, of which we have been married for 3. We both have stable jobs, he in the health sector and I in finance. We had always thought about starting a family around this stage of our lives, so when we found out about the pregnancy, our joy was immense. Jane, who is 32, did not share our happiness at all. She has always considered herself the independent spirit of the family, dedicating herself to traveling the world and changing professions every so often, which seems perfectly valid to me. I firmly believe that each person should live as they see fit, but from the moment she found out about my pregnancy, she seemed to take my life decisions as a personal attack. At first, they were subtle comments about how I was wasting my best years and settling for a mediocre life. He constantly reminded me that I was only 27 and that I had a lot to live for. Over time, these insinuations turned into open criticism of every aspect of my pregnancy. Although I never expected him to share my values or understand my decisions, his obvious contempt for everything I did seemed completely unnecessary. Her comments about my weight were particularly hurtful. She would say things like, "I see you've decided to completely abandon your appearance," or some women manage to keep their figure during pregnancy. At first I tried to ignore it, thinking that was just how she was, but the more I tried to brush it off, the more intense her attacks became. She would constantly send me articles about women who had lost their identity when they became mothers, or send me memes about how life ends when you have children. She was no longer just criticizing my physical appearance, she seemed to be on a personal mission to make me regret my decision to become a mother. I found out that she even spoke badly of me to friends we had in common, saying things like she's throwing away her potential or I don't understand why someone would choose to ruin their life like that. Her words hurt me especially because these people were close to me, and her comments had sown doubts in them. One friend even asked me if I really felt ready for the responsibility of being a mother, a question that hurt me deeply. It all came to a head during my baby shower. My mother and my best friend had organized a beautiful celebration, and everything was going perfectly until Jane showed up 3 hours late, visibly drunk. Throughout the celebration, she kept making loud comments about how huge I looked, even though I was only 6 months pregnant. She pointed out how puffy my face was and kept saying she couldn't believe I had traded in my dreams for diapers. I ended up crying in the bathroom while my mother tried to comfort me. Mark, furious with her behavior, asked her to leave. She left making a big deal of it, saying that we were all too sensitive. My friends were also upset by her attitude, but Jane didn't care at all. Over the next few weeks, she kept bringing up the incident, mocking how we all needed to relax and accusing me of being too emotional about the pregnancy. But the baby shower wasn't the only unpleasant incident. There were many smaller moments that I tried to ignore at the time because I was too tired to face them. For example, she once invited me to a yoga class, supposedly to help me keep in shape. However, when I arrived, she spent the whole class making indirect comments about how difficult it was for me to do the exercises compared to before. I left in tears, feeling that I could never live up to her impossible expectations. She also used to turn up unannounced at my house with her friends, treating me as if I were some kind of exhibit, pointing out how my life was going to change drastically and saying that she could never imagine being so tied down. These visits were not to strengthen our relationship or to show support, but to show off her free lifestyle in front of me. Last month, Jane got engaged to Robert, a successful 34-year-old businessman who came from a very traditional family. From what I had heard through my parents, he came from a wealthy family, was highly respected in his field and seemed to be the perfect match for Jane, at least on the surface. The engagement was quite sudden, although I suppose it shouldn't have surprised me, knowing Jane's tendency to make rash decisions in new relationships and experiences. However, this time I noticed a significant change in her behavior that I couldn't ignore. From one day to the next, my sister seemed to transform into a completely different person. After months without communication, without calls, without messages, without asking about me or the baby, she suddenly began to contact me regularly. It started with casual messages asking about the baby, followed by offers to bring gifts. She even bought expensive clothes and toys for the baby, things that neither Mark nor I had asked for or needed. At first I wanted to believe that maybe she was trying to make amends. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that her sudden enthusiasm was not sincere, but rather an act. What really infuriated me was discovering that Jane had been posting photos of my daughter on her social networks. Photos that she had taken during one of her unannounced visits. I never gave her permission to share those images, and she definitely didn't consult me about it. She accompanied them with texts like "the proudest aunt in the world" and "look at my beautiful niece," creating the image of a loving and present family member. It infuriated me because I knew the truth. It wasn't about my daughter or an alleged love for the family. It was about Jane trying to create an image, especially in front of Robert, that didn't reflect who she really was or how she had treated me throughout my pregnancy. Then Jane invited us to dinner. She presented it as a simple family gathering, but it was clear that the real purpose was for us to formally meet Robert. My parents, who were already delighted with him, insisted that it would be a great opportunity for us all to get together. Mark and I agreed to go, partly out of obligation, partly out of curiosity, to see how Jane would behave in front of Robert and the rest of the family. The dinner went smoothly. Jane was completely immersed in her role as the perfect hostess, making sure that everything went without a hitch. She introduced Robert to Mark and me with an exaggerated warmth that seemed forced, as if she were playing a role that she had not yet fully mastered. Robert, I must admit, was polite and seemed genuinely pleasant, but there was a tension in the air throughout the evening. I could feel the weight of all the things left unsaid hanging between us. During dinner, the conversation turned to family matters, children and future plans. Jane took the opportunity to reinforce the narrative she had been carefully constructing over the past few weeks, talking enthusiastically about how much she enjoyed spending time with my daughter and how happy she was to be an aunt. Robert, clearly impressed by this side of Jane, commented on how wonderful it was that she was so close to his niece. He said something like, "One of the things that makes me fall in love with Jane the most is her dedication to the family, especially with her niece. Her love for children is something that really struck me." At that moment, I couldn't hold back any longer. I looked at Robert and, with all the calm I could muster, I told him the truth. I explained how Jane had treated me throughout my pregnancy, how she had made fun of my body, belittled my decisions and made my baby shower a terrible time. I told him how she had made fun of my decision to become a simple suburban mother, how she had sent me cruel messages about wasting my life for a baby. The atmosphere in the room immediately became tense. Jane turned pale and, for the first time that night, was speechless. Robert seemed truly shocked, looking alternately at Jane and me, processing everything he had just heard. He asked to see the messages, and without hesitation I handed him my phone, showing him months of messages documenting Jane's constant cruelty. As I read them, his expression changed from confusion to disbelief and finally to anger. Jane tried to defend herself, saying that I had misinterpreted her and that her comments had been made in good faith, but it was too late. The evidence was there, clear as day. Robert clearly didn't know how to react. He got up suddenly, apologized and left the restaurant. We all sat in uncomfortable silence as we watched him leave. Jane panicked and ran after him, but before she left she turned to me and hissed, "You've ruined everything." That was 4 weeks ago, and what happened next was completely unexpected. Jane hadn't spoken to me since the dinner, no calls, no messages, nothing. I thought she was just ignoring me, but then, out of the blue, she called. Her voice was trembling, and for the first time in years she sounded vulnerable. She told me that Robert had called off the engagement. He couldn't reconcile the person she had shown him with the stories I had shared about his behavior towards me. But now I don't know what to do. Jane hasn't contacted me since that night and, to be honest, I'm not sure I want her to. My parents' silence doesn't help either. They have decided to remain completely neutral, offering neither opinion nor support, as if they expect everything to calm down by itself and for me to simply get over it. I get the impression that they are more concerned with maintaining the peace in the family than with acknowledging how deeply Jane's actions have hurt me, both during my pregnancy and now. It's frustrating because, despite everything, there is a small part of me that feels guilty. I wonder if I went too far confronting her in front of Robert. I wonder if I am responsible for their engagement breaking down. But then I remember the months of cruel comments, the malicious innuendos, and how she had the nerve to pretend she cared just to impress someone else. And I can't help feeling that, no matter how much my family tries to minimize it, what Jane did was wrong. So, was it wrong of me to expose her? Or did I finally stand up for myself like I should have done a long time ago? I wish I could say that I have a clear answer, but at the moment I'm still trying to figure it out and, honestly, I need help to understand it. Update 1. It's been several days since the incident and the situation is pretty much the same. In fact, the silence has become heavier with time. My parents haven't said a word about what happened in the restaurant. They haven't even tried to talk about it. Every day it becomes more evident that they just want all of this to go away. I expected them to at least try to show some support or ask me how I feel after all this. But no, they prefer to act as if nothing had happened, as if keeping quiet was enough for everything to sort itself out. What is affecting me the most are the messages I am receiving. Mutual friends and cousins are writing to me, all with the same message, that I should contact Robert and try to patch things up. It seems that now everything revolves around Jane's future. They are more concerned about her relationship with Robert than about all the damage he caused me, as if his commitment somehow justified his behavior. It's really frustrating. Everyone talks as if it were my responsibility to fix this situation. As if I had been the one to destroy their relationship and now it should be me who repairs it. They don't seem to care that Jane spent months emotionally hurting me during one of the most vulnerable moments of my life. No, apparently the problem is that I dared to defend myself and tell the truth. One cousin even suggested that I should apologize to Jane, saying it would be the mature thing to do. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Apologize for what? For telling Robert the truth about how Jane had treated me? Something that no one else seems to consider important. The hypocrisy is unbelievable. I have made it clear to everyone who has asked that I am not seeking revenge or holding on to grudges for no reason. But this is not about revenge. It is about how Jane hurt me emotionally when I was already going through a difficult time. She turned what should have been a wonderful experience, the birth of my first child, into something terrible. How am I supposed to forgive something like that? What if I had lost the baby because of all the stress it caused me? I was so depressed and anxious during my pregnancy, always worrying about what his next hurtful comment would be or how he would find a new way to hurt me. I can't even count the nights I spent crying, wondering if I was wrong to want to enjoy this new stage of my life. He took away moments that I can never get back, and now everyone expects me to forget about it because it could affect his future. I also tried to talk to my parents recently, although to call it a conversation would be an exaggeration. It was completely useless. I had hoped they would be able to understand my point of view and at least acknowledge how much all this had hurt me. Instead, they again maintained their neutral stance. It was the same old story, them not taking sides and acting as if this was a simple quarrel between sisters. However, I could tell from their tone and the way they avoided the subject that they wanted me to be the mature person in this situation. They want me to forgive Jane, to forget everything she did and move on because that's the right thing to do according to them, but I can't. I won't. I don't think they really understand how much all this has affected me. Or maybe they do understand and they just don't care. Either way, it was obvious that I wasn't going to get any real support from them. My mother kept repeating phrases like family is family and you've always had your differences, but your sisters and sisters forgive each other. My father just nodded, hardly saying a word. It was as if they were trying to minimize everything, as if this was just another one of Jane's typical tantrums that I should ignore to keep the peace. But for me, this is not about keeping the peace. It's about respect. It's about setting boundaries and refusing to let someone, even if they are family, abuse me just because we share the same blood. I will not let anyone make me feel guilty for protecting my mental health and standing up for what is right. They can all keep telling me to forgive and forget, but right now I can't do it. And honestly, I don't think I should. As for Jane, I haven't heard a word from her. Not a word. Part of me wonders if she's waiting for me to make the first move, to approach her like I have so many times before, but this time is different. This time I won't be the one trying to fix things. If she wants to talk, if she wants to repair our relationship, she'll have to be the one to reach out. And even then, I'm not sure I'm ready to let her back into my life after everything she's done. So here I am. Stuck in this situation where everyone seems to think I'm the bad guy, the one who ruined everything. But I know the truth. And for now, that's enough for me. Update 2. A few things have happened since my last update and, honestly, I'm still processing it all. I never imagined things would take this turn, but that's how it happened. After weeks of not hearing anything from Jane and my parents maintaining their usual neutrality, something unexpected happened. Robert contacted me. It was completely out of the blue. Mark and I were having lunch when we ran into him. I realized he had seen us first because he hesitated before approaching, but he finally did. I braced myself for an awkward moment, but surprisingly, he was very calm and even kind. He asked if we could talk for a moment. So we left the premises while Mark finished his lunch inside. Robert was polite but direct. And from the outset, he made it clear that neither Mark nor I were to blame for what had happened at that dinner party. He told me I could rest easy knowing it wasn't our fault. It was a relief to hear him say that, because although I knew I had done the right thing by exposing Jane's behavior, there was still a part of me that felt guilty. Maybe because everyone else seemed to believe that I had ruined her future. But hearing it from Robert, someone directly involved, helped to take the weight off my shoulders. He told me he appreciated my honesty that night and that I hadn't ruined anything, as Jane had said. Then he began to share his own concerns. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had noticed Jane's harshness and constant criticism. In the last few months, Robert had begun to see problems in their relationship. My confrontation had simply brought everything to light. He admitted that Jane's behavior towards me had shocked him. But more than that, he had begun to notice that her criticism extended to other aspects of their life together. He told me how Jane had become increasingly obsessed with status and material things, more interested in how much money he earned than in their actual relationship. She would make casual comments about his career and the kind of people he should be associating with, subtly trying to mold his life to fit the image she had in mind. Robert was not naive. He understood that relationships involve a certain level of mutual commitment and influence, but the more he paid attention, the more he realized that Jane was not looking for commitment, but control. She had even started criticizing him in front of his friends under the guise of jokes. But they were always comments about his appearance or about the things she thought he did wrong. He told me that he began to feel like he was being transformed into someone else, someone Jane considered worthy of her time and attention. And it wasn't just his engagement that was falling apart. His professional life was also in crisis. Jane had recently lost her last job, another of her adventures, as my parents like to call them. Jane had always been unstable in her career, jumping from one brilliant opportunity to the next, but this time it was different. She hadn't left of her own accord. She'd been fired. Robert didn't give any specific details, but he suggested that her attitude and her difficulty working in a team had been important factors. All this happened just as things between them began to deteriorate, which only added more tension to the situation. With her engagement in jeopardy and her career in ruins, Jane had contacted me. She hadn't spoken to me since the night at the restaurant, but suddenly she started sending me messages. The tone was completely different from before. There was no sarcasm or innuendo. Instead, she sounded vulnerable, almost desperate. She was asking for support, saying she felt lost and needed her sister. It was strange to read these messages because they were so different to the Jane I had come to know. The one who had spent months making me feel insignificant. Part of me wanted to feel compassion for her. Jane had always been the favorite in our family, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. As we grew up, I felt that she could make any mistake and always come out on top, while I constantly tried to measure up to her. And now everything she had built, or rather everything she had carefully prepared to look perfect from the outside, was collapsing around her. I could see how this was affecting her, how desperate she must be to salvage something, anything, from the wreckage. But then I remembered all the hurtful things she had said and done. I remembered sitting in the bathroom during my baby shower, crying while my friends and family tried to comfort me because Jane had turned what should have been a happy celebration into another opportunity to humiliate me. I remembered the message where a boring suburban mother called me and mocked my decision to start a family. How it made me feel that I was wasting my life by choosing happiness instead of her version of success. I remembered it all and, just like that, any sympathy I might have felt for her vanished. I'm not ready to forgive her, not yet. Maybe I never will be. Even if she is going through a difficult time, that doesn't erase the months of emotional damage she caused me. I've been thinking a lot about what it means to forgive someone, and I've realized that forgiveness is not something you can force just because someone else is suffering. Forgiveness, if it comes, has to be sincere, and right now I'm far from that point. My parents, as expected, still haven't taken sides when Jane came to them with her side of the story. They haven't really taken a stand. They are sympathetic to her situation, of course they are, but they still treat all this as if it were a simple fight between sisters. They keep asking me if I've spoken to her, if I'm willing to sit down and sort things out. I know they want me to be the one to fix everything like always, but this time I refuse to make the first move. I'm tired of being the one who gives in, who is expected to smooth things over. For now, I'm concentrating on my own family and the life that Mark and I are building together. I don't have the energy to deal with Jane's problems, nor do I feel any obligation to solve them. If she wants to fix things, she'll have to do it on her own. I've spent too much time putting her needs above mine, and that's not something I'm willing to do anymore. Update 3. Hello everyone. After talking to Robert, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: relief. It was as if a weight had been lifted. For a long time, I had been carrying this guilt, feeling responsible for what had happened between Jane and Robert, for the collapse of their perfect life. But hearing Robert tell me directly that it wasn't my fault, that Jane had brought this on herself, gave me a sense of peace. It confirmed everything I had been feeling all this time. For the first time, I realized that the guilt I had been carrying, the pressure from my parents, friends, and cousins to fix things, was misplaced. It was not my responsibility to repair what Jane had broken. With this new clarity, I decided it was time to confront Jane once and for all. I couldn't let this go on any longer, and I definitely wasn't going to let anyone pressure me into forgiving her or smoothing things over for her sake. So I contacted her and told her I wanted to meet in person, not to reconcile, but to put an end to all this once and for all. I needed her to know where I stood, and I needed her to hear it directly from me. When I arrived at her house, I was surprised by how she looked. She looked very different, unkempt, distressed and, for the first time in a long time, really vulnerable. But I held my ground, knowing that I shouldn't be fooled by this side of her. I had seen this side of Jane before, the side that could cry when things didn't go her way. This was the same person who for months had devoted herself to belittling my life decisions and making me feel like a failure for wanting to start a family. She might be devastated now, but that didn't change everything she had done. I didn't beat about the bush. I told her clearly that I wasn't going to accept any blame for what had happened. This disaster was entirely of his own making. It was time he took responsibility for his actions and stopped acting the victim. I made it clear to him that I was not the reason why his engagement had ended or why his life seemed to be falling apart. It was all the result of his own behavior. I saw the surprise on his face as I spoke, but I was not there to soften the blow. I had already been too soft for too long. I also suggested that if she wanted to make things right with Robert, she needed to sincerely apologize to him. For a moment, I felt like I was coming across as too controlling, almost like I was giving her orders, but it wasn't about controlling her. I just wanted to give her the opportunity to fix what little was left. Whether she decided to follow my advice or not was up to her, but at least I had said what I needed to say. Then came the hardest part. I told her that I didn't want her to be part of my daughter's life, at least not for now. I needed to see a real change in her before I would even consider letting her come back. I couldn't allow her to be around my daughter while still being the same person who had caused me so much pain. I needed to show that I was truly sorry and willing to change, not just for Robert or for myself, but because I had hurt the people closest to me. Until then, I told her it was better to keep our distance. Afterwards, I met with my parents. I had already waited too long and it was time for them to hear the truth too. I expressed my disappointment to them for not having taken a stand when it was obvious who was in the wrong. I explained that this was not a simple fight between sisters as they wanted to see it. It was something much more serious that had hurt me deeply. Their neutrality had only made things worse, and I made it clear to them that this time I needed them to be on my side. If they couldn't do it, I asked them to keep their distance too. It wasn't easy to tell them this, but it was necessary. So here we are. The situation is still complicated, but I no longer carry the burden of guilt that previously weighed me down. I'm not saying that everything is resolved or that I have all the answers, but at least now I feel like I have control over my own story. I'm setting boundaries that I should have set a long time ago, and I'm finally prioritizing my well-being and that of my family. Thank you to everyone who has followed my story and supported me with their words. It hasn't been an easy road, but I'm learning that sometimes doing the right thing is the hardest thing. Right now, I feel like I'm exactly where I need to be,